For this session, I wrote 25 words. For this session, I wrote 27 words, and my week's total word count is 248 words.
Do you like me? Of course I do, said Clara seriously. Why? Well, we have some qualities in common, things that are spontaneous in each of us, or were originally. You're implying that I haven't used myself very well? Clara hesitated. Well, I can't judge. A man, of course, has to go through a lot more, and I've been sheltered. Oh, don't stall, please, Clara, Amory interrupted. But do talk about me a little, won't you? Surely, I'd adore to. She didn't smile. That's sweet of you. First, answer some questions. Am I painfully conceited? Well, no. You have tremendous vanity, but it'll amuse the people who notice its preponderance. I see. You're really humble at heart. You sink to the third hell of depression when you think you've been slighted. In fact, you haven't much self-respect. Center of target twice, Clara. How do you do it? You never let me say a word. Of course not. I can never judge a man while he's talking. But I'm not through. The reason you have so little real self-confidence, even though you gravely announce to the occasional Philistine that you think you're a genius, is that you've attributed all sorts of atrocious faults to yourself and are trying to live up to them. For instance, you're always saying that you are a slave to highballs. But I am, potentially. And you say you're a weak character, that you've no will. Not a bit of will. I'm a slave to my emotions, to my likes, to my hatred of boredom, to most of my desires. You are not. She brought one little fist down onto the other. You're a slave, a bound, helpless slave to one thing in the world, your imagination. You certainly interest me. If this isn't boring you, go on. I notice that when you want to stay over an extra day from college, you go about it in a sure way. You never decide at first, while the merits of going or staying are fairly clear in your mind. You let your imagination shinny on the side of your desires for a few hours, and then you decide. Naturally, your imagination, after a little freedom, thinks up a million reasons why you should stay, so your decision, when it comes, isn't true. It's biased. Yes, objected Amory, but isn't it lack of willpower to let my imagination shinny on the wrong side? My dear boy, there's your big mistake. This has nothing to do with willpower. That's a crazy, useless word. Anyway, you lack judgment. The judgment to decide at once when you know your imagination will play you false, given half a chance. That was an excerpt from This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I read this book January 2024, and the exchange between Clara and Amory has stuck with me to this day. Since reading this book, I have been contemplating deeply on the idea of judgment, discernment, willpower. I used to think that discernment and judgment were interchangeable, but I think differently about them now. If you look at this thought card, you can see the little keys. And today, I noticed that they're slightly different from each other. It occurred to me that judgment and discernment are like these keys, where they're similar and they serve similar functions, but they're not interchangeable as I had assumed. I think discernment can aid in making judgment calls, but judgment requires something more to effectuate, and the something more is method. I think one can have a keen sense of discernment, but also lack in judgment. And I also think that a strong sense of judgment does not require discernment, but it does require method. Method, simply put, is the ability to organize one's thoughts and apply an equal measure of consideration for one's thoughts. One can be supremely discerning and still frivolous and whimsical in their decision making, but one cannot be a strong judge in spontaneity. I think there is a time and a place in one's life to be open to spontaneity and whatever wants to come one's way. And surely that is a valid way to go about one's life, to learn and grow. But it can quickly become a trap as well. If spontaneity is one's dominant way of approaching life, it is very difficult to cultivate the skill of method. And though one might reflect in the aftermath of spontaneous sequences of events, mere reflection is not method thinking, methodical thinking. Personally, I have relied heavily in my life on my sense of discernment, but I've realized that actually hasn't made me a strong judge. Mostly this is because I had accepted the idea that judging is bad, one should not judge, God is only judge. And I think now that this is an entire misunderstanding on what judging is. Judging is the ability to make decisions based on methodical thinking or methodical approaches, and then adhering to that decision throughout the course of the variables that might come one's way. It is a form of discipline in going about one's life. And such a manner of life does not necessarily mean that one is closed off to new opportunities or experiences, but it is a pacing of them. That's what I've been contemplating lately. I'm going to end this vlog here. I'm going to get some electrolytes into my system to hydrate, and then I will sit for my writing session. And then once I have that done, I will add that clip at the end.
For this session, I wrote 81 words.